Hello everyone. This is the 25th part of the story, Avatar in DC Universe. Chapter 75, Fire. Is Aden's point of view. I forgot how alien it felt not having access to my air bending while I was in the fire plane. All around, I was surrounded by volcanoes, pools of lava and an angry storm that spewed out lightning every second. The ground was as hard as ever and hot, especially to my bare feet. I was only dressed in training pants that I had folded up to my calves. My upper body was in display and a light sheen of sweat covered it. I had only been here for 20 minutes but I was already sweating, despite my physique. I held the horse pose. Hands tucked in near my hips, shoulders tense and straight, legs bent slightly with my toes facing opposite directions, the left leg to the left and the right leg to the right. I was going through the beginner forms of fire bending. Fire bending comes from the breath, not the muscles, then that breath is turned into energy which extends out from the body, therefore producing flames. At least that was according to Uncle Iroh. Man, I wish I had an Uncle Iroh. Most of this shit would be learned in a week just by following his teachings. As it was, I had to form my own understanding through trial. My clothes were already packed away in my room at Lucifer's penthouse as well as stuff like the jewelry bag. That reminds me, I really need to sell it. Luckily, money was not an immediate problem, seeing as I was mooching off the devil. Wonder how he feels by that. He's probably cool with it. Lucy's a chill dude, all things considered. After completing that task, I decided to start my training in earnest. The past few days had been crazy as fuck and I hadn't had time to just grind. Hopefully, things had truly settled down and I would get a few uninterrupted days to just do my thing. My belly contracted as I exhaled slowly and heavily. In that same breath, I lifted my right leg, stretched it out and stepped forward. I inhaled and leaned back my upper body before throwing my left hand out to the front, fingers slightly bent to the underside of the knuckles in a palm strike. I exhaled and held the pose. My left hand swept to the right side and I pivoted on my right leg. The left leg alternated with the right, by going to the front while my right hand exploded forward in a swift but powerful fist. Just in time for me to exhale. Hot air escaped my lips as I slightly smiled. That had been awesome. Fire was incredible. Like a rush through my veins. It wanted to be used. Was eager to. But therein lies the problem. It was too eager. Without sufficient control it would rebel. Become unfocused and spread out to wherever it wanted to go. That's why I was only going through the forms without actually manifesting the flames. And it was hard too. I could feel it blazing under my skin. The firebender forms were similar to airbender forms in the context of having a real martial art as its building blocks. I didn't know what martial art it was, but I could see it in my moves and reference some of the Shaolin monks in YouTube clips I'd seen when I had found out I was the Avatar. Unfortunately, the only copy of martial arts I'd gotten from Red Tornado was Ba Gua Zhang, which was closely related to airbending, and it felt like too much of a hassle to go and start looking for firebendings related martial art just to add more move sets to the bending. Move sets that I would abandon as soon as I achieved master level. So I kept up the practice, trying to understand the flow of breath as I danced. Trying to understand what fire was. The firebenders in the show had traded spiritual synchronization with the element, for power and brutality. They had downgraded this art from a beautiful expression of one's being to a tool used to destroy. But fire was much more. I spent a week doing nothing but the moves and forms. By the third day, I could even feel I had a spectator. Due to my connection with the elemental dimension, I sensed a small dragon watching me while hiding behind a few rocks, studying me in curiosity. That didn't stop me, however. I kept dancing, my body becoming familiar with the moves. I danced until the oppressive heat of the dimension became comforting. I danced until the air above my skin heated up, becoming blurred and forming mirages. At the end of the week I finally understood it. I finally understood the reason I danced. I finally had the answer. Fire is life. Those profound words hit me with the force of a 12-wheeler truck. I jumped and spinned in the air. My hands sprayed out to the sides while my feet were aimed at the ground, and then I breathed out. Huge plumes of orange fire escaped all 4 of my limbs. Stronger flames than I had ever made before. I understood a little more about control now. No more outbursts of flames as I tried to regulate the flame's power. There was a strain as I fed more breath, more power into the pillars of flame coming out of my hands and feet though. Although I understood more about the beast of an element that fire is. Channeling that much power through my muscles was steadily becoming more and more painful. For reference, the pillars grew to 50 meters long, while fanning out. The smallest width was 10 meters at the base of where the element escaped my hands and over 30 meters at its end. It was exhilarating, invigorating, painful, and oh so beautiful. The never-ending stream of flames escaping out of my hands became too much when the ground below started heating up and melting into lava. I took a deep breath and pulled back the energy. Deprived the life aiming to fly away and escape into the air. My feet touched the ground far away from the crater full of lava where I had stood before. I blinked once then twice in disbelief. I was back to my senses. I looked at my hands in wonder and then at the crater, where boiling hot smoke rose up into the air, from the red-hot liquid down below. That was so much destruction, and only in the span of a few seconds. My progress with fire bending was faster than air bending, I observed. The only explanation I had for that was that I now knew the trick on how to go about bending any of the elements. Understanding them being key, first and foremost, then building up my control by not forcing the element to work for me but instead with me. Fire was different though. Control was much more needed than with any other element, yet not that recommended. I know, confusing. And that is because the purpose of life is to live. Ergo fire is alive. Stone cannot move without an earthbender due to its stubbornness. Air cannot be directed without an airbender because of its freedom, and water cannot be contained in one shape without a waterbender because its whole deal is being non-uniform, sporadic, or in simpler terms, uneven. Fire, on the other hand, could grow and spread even without a firebender. The duality comes into play, where control is both emphasized yet not. You can't really control something alive. It has its own existence. Imposing on that can have adverse effects. Any more conjectures would have to be observed in a spar. A bright smile lit up my face. Oh, I had been waiting for this for a long time. I was just about to press on the tab to purchase a firebender soldier as a sparring partner when my belly loudly protested. That's when I realized I had gone a week without food or water. I looked down at myself and marveled at how shredded I looked. I also couldn't help but notice that, although I was hungry, I felt like I could go on without food for an even longer while. Was this a consequence of my powerful physique, or was my theory about fire being life, more than just a philosophical ideal to strengthen my understanding of the element? In any case, I resolved to first get something to eat before doing anything else. I spared a look at a few huge rock formations that had luckily escaped destruction and waved my hand at the red dragon youngling watching me while hidden. The small dragon ducked and I found myself chuckling as I teleported out and into sanctuary. Where's my Grango? Hall of Justice. The team were all gathered in the library section of the Hall of Justice, waiting for the sudden brief they'd been called in for. Artemis hadn't seen much of the others over the past few days after the destruction of Mount Justice and Aden's disappearance. Wally was on a table tennis playing by himself. She had no idea how he'd gotten one into the Hall of Justice. Calder and Superboy were off to the corner speaking, and boy wonder, she looked around and found him poring over the Hall of Justice's computer for hidden files. He'd been acting different these past few days. Distant and distracted even more than everyone else. The only one missing was Mgan. Being her ever-excitable self, Artemis figured she was off somewhere, exploring the Hall of Justice. Luckily, today the hall was closed in lieu of some important renovations being carried out. Or at least that was the excuse given to the public. Still, the past week's circumstances were not ideal for team cohesion. She still didn't know what to think of that whole situation. Hurt? Sure. Disappointed? Sure. Betrayed? Sure, but that was as long as she understood that they were also to blame. Hey Artie. How was your week? Mgan flew down closer to her where she was sitting down on the couch trying to catch up on homework. Surprise, surprise, being out every night to fight crime had an adverse effect to her school assignments, who knew? She looked up at the Martian girl and raised an eyebrow at the nickname. Artie? She asked, making the other girl blush. Artemis still didn't get how that was possible. Your face is green, damn it. Uncle John has been telling me to diversify my pop culture knowledge instead of learning everything from Hello Megan. Artemis was even more confused than usual. Hello Megan? She questioned, wondering what the bubbly girl was talking about. Mgan's blush grew stronger and she hurriedly shook her hands and tried to change the subject. Never mind. Anyway, you didn't answer me. How was your... Her statement was cut off when the door to the room opened and in walked Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Canary and Batman. Along with them were each of the team's individual mentors. Artemis and the others quickly gathered before the Justice League. The meeting had begun. Chapter 76, New Possibilities. General point of view. Due to personal issues, I have decided that I'm unfit to work in a league capacity as expected from my colleagues and hence, after careful deliberation, have resigned from the Justice League effective as of yesterday at 2100 hours. Batman announced. He paused to let that information sink in. And sink in it did. Shock, surprise, and in the case of one green, red and yellow themed superhero, anger populated the sidekicks' faces. You're joking. Wally spoke up first, his words mirroring the disbelief in everyone's mind. It was a hard concept to wrap their minds around. Batman was, after all, one of the big three. Superman, Wonder Woman and he were quite literally the face of the Justice League, and now he was resigning. This feels all too fast, Mgan said while rubbing her hand in sadness. None of it was going to plan. She had thought that after finally joining a team, a family here on Earth, things would go well for her. That they would face all obstacles and come out on the other side stronger to show for it. Just like how Megan seemed to solve all her problems in just under 30 minutes of episodic run. Why couldn't it go like that? Wonder Woman, who was behind Batman, glanced at her and gave Mgan a comforting nod. She understood her inner turmoil. At least someone did. Miss Martian nodded back, telling the older woman she would be all right even without using words. Is this about the Aden issue? Are you getting heat because of how the mission and subsequent actions led to his departure from the team? If so, he's our responsibility, Batman. Not yours. Aqualad stepped forward and addressed the Dark Knight. His words made the other leaguers behind Batman share looks with each other. No, it's not. My desire to leave the Justice League is not because of the events from the past few days. Maelstrom is also a Justice League issue. Not the team's. You have done all you can and the standing orders not to engage him still apply. Batman's commanding tone left no room for discussion. Aqualad looked at the rest and saw the looks of stubbornness mirrored on their faces just like his. I'm sorry, but you are wrong. We've thought about it and come to a unanimous decision. Maelstrom was never a leaguer. We have fought with him, bled with him, laughed with him. He is ours to bring in. And we will do it with or without the Justice League's help. His response was firm. His words, hard and obstinate. Despite the circumstances, Aquaman felt proud of the man his protege was becoming. Batman and Aqualad locked gazes for a few uncomfortable seconds before the Dark Knight slightly smiled. They were taking charge. Standing up to them. Batman was glad and heartened that the team was in good hands. Very well. I will leave the finer details for you and the new overseer to discuss, Aqualad. At that juncture, Wonder Woman stepped forward. Following Batman's resignation, we have decided that the team needs a new overseer. Someone who will take over Batman's responsibilities. And after a lengthy discussion, Captain Atom was chosen to replace him. He will be assigning you missions after the League has carefully vetted them to avoid as many mishaps as we can. Wonder Woman raised her hand to silence the uproar that she knew was coming from Kid Flash and Superboy. That is not to call your skills and abilities to question. We all feel like it's been an eventful month. A few relatively harmless missions to ease you into the new state of things is not that bad. She finished gently. They're coddling us. Treating us like kids. Connor grumbled quietly. And Artemis had to agree. But she didn't feel like that was a bad thing. They were kids after all, and taken everything that had recently happened, a few missions where things didn't get derailed to the point where the ramifications would lead to a team member leaving as well as a leaguer resigning from the Justice League was welcome to her. Captain Atom will be over later to discuss the details of your new base of operations as well as. Robin couldn't listen anymore. He got up abruptly and left. Wonder Woman trailed off, staring at the boy Wonder. Batman placed a hand on her shoulder and shook his head. He was going to talk to Boy Wonder himself. Later that same night, Wayne Mansion. Bruce twirled the Eskrima sticks in his hands smoothly. The door to the training room opened and Dick, out of his Robin costume, walked in. He made contact with Bruce's eyes and wordlessly walked to the practice weapon rack, getting his own Eskrima sticks. Dick stepped forward onto the sparring mat and stretched his body, taking great care to keep his attention on his mentor, lest an attack came in while he was preoccupied. He'd learned that the hard way. After completing the action, both mentor and protege bowed to each other in a show of respect. Then, they straightened up and the bout unofficially begun. From sparring with Bruce all these years, Dick knew he was always at a disadvantage. Bruce was just stronger in every conceivable way. The only thing Dick had working for him was his small size, agility, and skills. But to actively use them to his advantage, he was usually the one instigating the first move. To keep Bruce inside his rhythm instead of the other way around. Before we start, let's make a deal. If you win, I'll tell you everything about what you've been searching the back computer's files for. Bruce stopped him before he could lunge forward. That was a good deal. Dick wasn't immediately happy though, there was always a catch. And if you win? He asked his adopted father. Bruce looked at him with a hard gaze on his face. You'll tell me why you felt the need to not only disrespect your teammates but the League and I for walking out during the briefing. Oh, so this was what it was all about. Despite the seriousness, Dick decided his teenage rebel phase had arrived. He aimed an Eskrima stick at Bruce and smiled like a little shit. Bring it on, old man. Aden's point of view. After a good long shower under the waterfall, grangos and roasted boar meat along with a nap on a DIY hammock, I was ready to face the music. I hadn't left the elemental dimension even once. It was peaceful here. Down on Earth everything was just too much. Too convoluted and complicated. In comparison, the grind was simple and therapeutic. I knew that soon I wouldn't keep off from interacting with Lucifer and planning out my next move, but first, I wanted to get my fire bending to a good enough level that I could protect myself in case things went to shit without overly relying on air bending. I finished the last of my grangos and teleported back to the fire plane. Instantly, the temperature changed from the cool breeze of the beach on Sanctuary to a blistering heat and heavy smoke-filled atmosphere of the Flame Land. Ah, that's actually not a bad name. Flame Land, I liked it. I shook my head to get rid of the distracting thoughts and brought out the display screen. I clicked on the training points, which still read 55, and was taken to a database with 4 sections. 2 of which were grayed out. The ones that weren't were the bendings I had access to. One was of air bending and contained anyone from Aang's kid, Bumi, who became an airbender at his old age, to Zahir. The second section was of fire bending and contained only expert-ranked firebenders and masters. Wait. My eyes widened, the list was not as sparse as before. I quickly dismissed that window and pulled up my main menu. Right there on the tab depicting my fire bending, something had changed. The rankings were beginner or practitioner, whichever you want to call it, expert, master and grand master. My ranking had changed from practitioner to expert, all in the cause of 1 week. It was crazy, unexpected, and totally made sense. For starters, fire was my favorite bending because of just how cool it was, so I was super into it, and secondly, I had advantages while learning it that I didn't when I was learning air bending. Fire bending, expert. Locked. So I now only had to unlock a sub-skill to get my proficiency level to the next stage, which is master. After mastering both the sub-skills, would similarly go through an advancement trial for fire to get my bending to grand master level. It was a bit confusing because the ranking didn't change from master level. Unlocking and mastering one sub-skill would elevate me to master level immediately, but even mastering two, I would still be stuck at master level without the advancement trial. Which brought up another question: what if I tried to master another sub-skill before the advancement trial? I mean, thinking about it, the Avātār System had only placed the bare minimum requirements for me to go through the advancement trial, but it is not said anywhere that I was restricted to only 2 sub-skills. It would of course be a waste of time, to be honest. I couldn't think of any other sub-skill of fire that stood out to me for the time being. Maybe Phoenix Regeneration? But that was too out of left field. Or was it? I looked around the dimension I was in. There were dragons in it. Dragons had showed the capability of controlling different colored flames in canon. Maybe I was looking at this from a very shallow perspective. The bare bones of an idea were building inside my mind. The path to power is never easy, but what I had working for me was creativity. I couldn't lose that. I couldn't allow it to be washed away by discounting things as impossible without trying them. I scrolled down the database of opponents. I now had more variety to pick from. There was General Zhao and a plethora of more fire-bending masters like Zuko. I would have loved to pick one of them, but ultimately my points decided it for me. I needed to see how good I actually was. I clicked on a firebender soldier and got ready. Chapter 77, Let's Negotiate Part 1. Aden's Point of View. Here goes nothing. I clicked on the tab depicting the firebender soldier. Feels like shopping. I mused, seeing the sudden drop of my training points from 55 to a measly 5. I endured the heartache. Just barely. The display screen disappeared from my vision, and a few meters away from me, a white light appeared. I took a step back and settled into a ready stance as the ball of white light coalesced into a humanoid figure. The light disappeared, and on its previous position, a man was revealed. I ran my eyes over his body. Top to bottom. He was dressed in a standard Fire Nation Army uniform with the helmet covering most of his head, although the faceplate with huge eyes was missing. The uniform seemed to be a mix of different eras of the Fire Nation Army. The man was of average height, with an average face and a slightly intimidating aura around him. Comes with being a soldier, I guess. This guy was a veteran. The fight was not going to be easy. He fell into a standard firebending pose. The same one I knew from the basic firebending forms I got as a knowledge pack, but this emphasized brutal efficiency. I had to change it a little to fit my body and fighting style better. I mirrored his footing and established eye contact with the blank-faced man. A copy of the real one, most probably. The air between us got supercharged, and on some undetectable signal, we both moved. I stepped aside and allowed the fireball to pass harmlessly by my left. My opponent shuffled to the right with his hands on his hips and threw another fist forward, followed by a second one from his other hand. The 2 fireballs were aimed to box me in. I calmly stepped forward and pulled on my own energy. I felt a thin covering of thermal energy spread along my hands. The first fireball was now bearing down upon me. I slapped it out of the way, sending it to blast the ground on my left and just wash away upon contact with the unyielding rocky terrain. The eye stabbed both of my hands out at the one behind it, spreading them in a circular motion and unraveling it. The flames licked my sides, and I barely felt the heat as they disappeared into the air. My opponent, on the other hand, took the opportunity of me being occupied to pull in closer to my body. His fist was inches away from landing onto my face when I dodged it and jumped away, assisted by the fire rocketing out of my soles. The firebender soldier spinned in place, stepped forward and pushed his hands out towards my body suspended in mid-air. A torrential wave of flame, glowing yellow, rose up to meet me. In response, I raised a hand up to the sky and swiftly brought it down like an axe. The wave of ocean parted upon contact with me, and with that I had learned how he fought. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I leaned forward and pushed off the air with a flame burst. My trajectory brought me towards the firebender soldier. The man was conscious enough of the battlefield that he jumped away before I could land on his body. It didn't save him though. I slammed onto the ground and a wave of flames rose up from my contact with it. The fire was easily 6 feet long and the eruption beared down on the opponent mercilessly. With a barely audible scream, the firebender soldier disappeared into white light. Cracks spread out under my legs along the blackened ground. I smiled, getting up and bowing towards the firebender soldier. Well, that fight had shown me how a veteran firebender fought. The soldier's movements had been stiff and stubborn. Something I would expect from an earthbender. I sighed looking around. The Fire Nation had really forgotten the essence of firebending. The fight had been unexpectedly too easy. I don't think I was going to spar with this type of opponent again. If I must, I should go for the truly skilled firebenders. The ones who understood the essence of the flame. I brought up my minimized screen and looked at the training points. Still stuck at 5. I'm so poor. Well, it seems like I now needed Lucifer even more. To ensure I didn't slow down my practice, a few combat missions to earn more points were paramount. I looked towards a few huge boulders and smiled. My little friend was back. I wanted to approach the little dragon, but somehow it didn't feel like the right time. I had a feeling that it would come to me when it was ready. So I just waved at its direction and disappeared out of the flame land. A few grangos to ease my hunger later. Bending was kinda energy intensive. I decided to go back to Earth. I had been putting off talking to Lucy, but it couldn't wait any longer. Time was moving and the Young Justice timeline was still mostly an enigma to me, past the Red Volcano mission. I knew a few things in passing, but nothing concrete. For starters, I knew that Wally would die in Season 2, but not because of what. I also knew that Speedy would become a Justice League member, but that something would happen. It was confusing. Just half-clicked Reddit threads that I had dismissed entirely upon seeing the number of speculations and trolling going on. Ask me about Marvel and I assure you I'll know shit that isn't even mainstream. Ask me about DC and outside Batman Beyond, I was a complete novice. It was times like this that I regretted not paying more attention to the DC world. To be fair though, who woulda thunk I would be transmigrated here? Me, the guy who's always too lost in his own world. The guy who finds it hard to make friends. The guy who has never had a meaningful relationship. The reason I broke up with my girlfriend was, as she aptly put, I sucked at communication. Whose sick joke was it that they thought I would be appropriate as an ambassador? My personality was a complete opposite to that. Anyway, nothing to do about it now. I left Sanctuary through a portal and stepped out into Lucifer's living room. I looked around strangely as the portal disappeared. I was aiming for my room. I told him. Lucifer chuckled mysteriously, while also managing to look apologetic. Sorry, I hijacked your landing. Why don't you take a seat, Aden? We haven't seen much of each other and I wanted us to have a little chat. He was dressed in a dark silky kimono that covered him to just below his calves. His words made me raise an eyebrow. You hijacked a dimensional warp gate and redirected it from where it was going to bring me to you? And that maddening smile is back. I sighed and sank my body on the couch across from him. I groaned a little at the comfortable sensation. Although the grind was sacred, sleeping on a hammock or the ground is really not good for my back. I almost fell asleep just from leaning on the couch. You sound surprised. my devilish host commented, taking a sip of tea. He saw my eyes land on the cup and snapped a finger. A cup of steaming hot chocolate appeared on the table before me. How did you know what? Never mind. I keep on forgetting who I'm dealing with. I shook my head and took a sip of the hot chocolate, shuddering in appreciation. Thick and smooth, just like my mom makes. Oh boy, now I miss her even more. Okay, I'm sorry, but I actually gotta ask, how did you make it exactly the way I like it? Might be magic. He smirked with a small upturn of his lips. In other words, you read my mind and found out what I like. I deadpanned. Lucifer chuckled. I don't need to read your mind for something as trivial as this. He leaned forward. To tell you the truth, I can see what you desire when you desire it and how you desire it. Comes with being the all-powerful scary devil. Desire came from me after all. Was he talking about those powerful cosmic entities that presented an aspect of reality? The Endless, I think they were called. Still not a big DC fan, guys. That hasn't changed. Lucifer cocked his head to the side while leaning back. He studied me with something akin to curiosity. You even know about them? Intriguing. And the answer is no. None of the Endless came from me. That's preposterous. He waved a hand in dismissal of the notion. Then his serious gaze locked onto me. That said, I would ask you to explain to me exactly where you come from or how you possess knowledge that should not be known to a mortal. Especially how you seemed to know Maze and I during our first meeting. My breath hitched. Fuck, what was I expecting? Of course he would know about that. But it's been forever since I didn't know something. Forever since I have been so interested. Count yourself lucky, you get to keep your secrets. I gulped and nodded in appreciation. Thanks. He could have simply taken it all if he wanted to, without asking. It was only much later that I found out had he attempted to do so, my brain would have become a fighting ground as the Avatar state fended off any attempts to do a deep dive inside my mind. My surface thoughts were laid bare for a skilled enough telepath like Martian Manhunter to read, but not without sufficient effort. However, no matter how strong they were, no one could read my actual memories. No one. The Avātār System was fucking scary. This marks the end of part 25 of the story, Avātār in DC Universe. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.